the question I have about this whole concept is it really anything new, or has it just been like this for 1,000 years? In other words, that there's always a deep state, there's always a bureaucracy that has this excessive power over, so my whole question is, to what extent is it sort of like a reality which is being turned into something like a new reality when it's just a reality that has been with us? Do you have any opinions about that?
I completely agree with the way you're posing the question. I think the way I would put it is when people refer to the idea of the deep state, it's a phrase that means to have meaning by pointing out something people don't assume to be the case sometimes when they're talking about how a democracy, a modern Western liberal democracy, is supposed to function in theory, right? Because when you're taught about it in school growing up, you're told about the branches of elected government or about how the different branches of elected government appoint and select the other parts. And they don't focus you on the civil servants that are maybe initially appointed through the executive or whatever else, but then maybe keep their jobs, and about the institutional cultures that develop that outlast in administrations that come and go with elections, and also the procedural powers that these institutions end up amassing to themselves, sometimes without a lot of scrutiny, without anyone saying, okay, everybody, we're going to have a vote today. Should we, in practice, make it so that our judiciary and in particular, let's say the, state prosecutor's office or whatever, while not being elected by the voters or appointed in a way that's transparent to elected officials, will actually have the ability to unseat an elected chief executive or something like that. So I think that people are right to use the term on one level to call attention to that, but I think you're absolutely right that people who are used to living in Western democracies can't help to some degree but buy into the mythology of democracy, which is that democracy is a wholly and totally new way that people govern themselves that has achieved escape velocity from the human condition. And that never before did we have something like this. And now we have something totally new, which is that rulers are accountable to the people. As the Torah shows us, in fact, when talking, for example, about how Paro enslaves the Ivrim, the Hebrews, at the beginning of Sefer Shmot, it doesn't just say Paro is a king. And because of the king, everyone has to do what he says. And so he said, enslave the Hebrews, and so people did it. It actually says he makes an argument to his own people. He has to persuade his people to follow along with this proposal that he says, Hava nidhakma, right? Like, let's be clever in how we deal with them, right? So why does Paro have to give an explanation to his people if he can just tell them what to do and they have to do it? And whenever you see the political power of even the ideal notion of a sort of super powerful king in Tanakh, you see that also in Megillat Esther with the Achashverosh. Achashverosh can't just do whatever he wants. He has all these ministers and advisors who are telling him things, and he can't rescind his own orders because once he makes an order, he has to stick with it. There's all this sense of, in order to wield power of a certain kind, there actually are norms and conventions that must be obeyed, and there's ways of communicating your will to the next level, and then that goes down to the next level, and you see the intricacies of that often laid out in Tanakh, because Tanakh has a very realistic view of politics that says, like, there's no such thing as one person who's in charge of everything. That's a sales job as far as monarchy is concerned. So even in monarchies, you actually have all this accountability to other people and all this constraint from other people. But I think it works the opposite way as well, that with democracies, you can make up some story about, oh, well, the people elect the representatives and the executive or whatever, and then they're accountable to the people. But in fact, there are a bunch of satraps or ministers or advisors or whatever who still wield great power and are not necessarily elected or are not clearly accountable, and it's not very transparent. And that goes on in the present day as well. So yeah, I don't think that in the ideal Judaic political situation that we can say, oh, we will have fully eliminated whatever someone might call the deep state, and there will only be some kind of true, perfect, and transparent accountability, because that may be a fantasy of kind of removing the human condition from our politics, and that is not likely to happen anytime soon. But I think what might be the case is that you could, if the right leaders with the right priorities wield enough power for enough time, then they could have influence of the right kind on the quote unquote deep state to make sure the people who become entrench the right kinds of values. Like right now, what values are being entrenched by, I don't know, the Israeli deep state or the American deep state? The US State Department has famously been ferociously anti-Israel for, I don't know, half century or more, in a way that everyone knows you just can't change by electing this or that president. So how did that happen, and how do you change it? No one knows, and it's hopeless. And when it comes to Israel, there's all sorts of Shomrei Asaf, like gatekeepers or whatever, who are similarly entrenched, and they didn't entrench Ahavat Hashem or Yirat Hashem or some kind of commitment to Torah, and they entrenched other things. But you could entrench some good things with the right, and maybe that's the best you can hope to do.